right, welcome back everybody to Hawk's podcast. I'm Hawk, I'm your host. As always, if you enjoy this video, please click like, please leave a comment, please subscribe to my page. It's free to do so. Today's podcast is going to be kind of a serious one, and I should let you guys know at the beginning there's going to be some graphic descriptions of sexual abuse in this video. I'm recording this on Sunday, August 10th. Ghislaine Maxwell is in the news again. After the DOJ released a memo the Sunday after July 4th saying there is no Epstein client list, there's no evidence that he blackmailed anybody. They are not going to investigate this case further, and they are not going to release any further documents from the case file. There has been a flurry of activity. There has been a great deal of unrest amongst everybody, including Donald Trump's base and the bro manosphere podcasters who all had Trump on as a guest on their podcasts leading up to the election. Everybody is highly upset at this memo from the DOJ, and since that happened, Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and what they did to hundreds of minors, teenage girls, has dominated every news cycle, along with Donald Trump's very close friendship with Jeffrey Epstein over a period of about 15 years, and everything that goes along with that. And Donald Trump has been putting his foot in his mouth every single day and giving new life to this story. So here's what we're going to discuss today. We're going to discuss what Ghislaine Maxwell was indicted for, what charges she actually faced in her trial, who testified during her trial. There were 4 victims who testified during her trial. We're going to go through their testimony, and we're going to talk about what she was actually convicted of. She is a convicted child sex trafficker, multiple counts. And I think, given the fact that Donald Trump has said that he has the power to issue her a complete pardon, that it's important that we all be informed as to exactly what she did, according to a jury in Manhattan federal court, and the allegations that were made against her by the incredibly brave young women who testified against her at trial. It's, inexplicably, a week ago, Todd Blanch, who was Donald Trump's former criminal defense attorney in his Manhattan case, where he was convicted of 34 felony counts for improperly trying to influence the 2016 election. Donald Trump is still, to this day, a convicted felon. And as I like to observe, he has been convicted of more felonies than any immigrant who has been arrested in the United States since the beginning of Donald Trump's second term. That is an indisputable fact, and those felony convictions remain on Donald Trump's record to this day. But I think, and it's been reported after that meeting, that 2-day-long interview with Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanch and Ghislaine Maxwell and her defense attorney, where no other witnesses were present, but apparently there was an audio recording of those interviews that was made. Shortly after that, she was moved from a high-security federal prison in Florida because apparently her life was in danger because her other co-inmates were viewing her as a snitch for having met with the number 2 at DOJ for 2 days. It's been reported that Todd Blanch asked her questions about roughly 100 additional individuals involved in this case, and that she answered those questions openly and honestly, even though in her indictment she was indicted on 2 counts of perjury. It is absolutely in her self-interest to do what Donald Trump wants her to do in this circumstance, because he has, in very mob boss style language, He was like, well, I have the power to issue her a full pardon. I haven't decided whether or not I'm going to do that. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And he said that before her interviews with Todd Blanch, clearly telegraphing a signal to her, I think. We're going to reverse engineer this a little bit. I'm going to start out this episode before I get into her indictment by reading an official press release from the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, dated Tuesday, June 28th, 2022. Her trial, Ghislaine Maxwell's trial, took place in November and December of 2021, and she was sentenced about 6 months later. So this is the press release that the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York issued on June 28th, 2022, the date of her sentencing, where she was sentenced to 20 years in prison for conspiring with Jeffrey Epstein to sexually abuse minors. The U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York at that time was Damian Williams, and Mr. Williams issued the following statement. The United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York announced that Ghislaine Maxwell was sentenced today in Manhattan Federal Court by United States Circuit Judge Allison J. Nathan to 240 months, 20 years, in federal prison for her role in a scheme to sexually exploit and abuse multiple minor girls with Jeffrey Epstein over the course of a decade. Maxwell was previously found guilty on December 29th, 2021, following a jury trial of conspiracy to entice minors to travel to engage in sexual acts, conspiracy to transport minors to participate in illegal sex acts, transporting a minor to participate in illegal sex acts, sex trafficking conspiracy, and sex trafficking of a minor. Deviating from the statement here for a second, there were multiple allegations and there was testimony in open court, and there was included in the indictment itself multiple allegations. Even though she was not charged with this conduct, there were multiple allegations and there was testimony that was presented to the jury by victims that on several occasions Ghislaine Maxwell also participated in the sexual abuse of minors. And so, I mean, politically, I don't think that Donald Trump can issue her a pardon. I think that's a multiple steps too far. But Trump and Ghislaine Maxwell are both highly, highly motivated in this set of circumstances. Trump believes that she can say something to clear him. She obviously believes that if she says and does the right things, Trump can pardon her or commute her sentence. She's already been transferred to a minimum security federal prison that's essentially a minimum security work camp. And the inmates there are very upset as well because she is ineligible by law to be an inmate at that facility in Texas because those facilities are for nonviolent offenders. She is a convicted child sex trafficker who engaged in sex acts with minors. And so those inmates are freaked out. They're like, she doesn't belong here. She has no place here. This is wrong that she's here. But at her last prison, all of the other inmates are like, she's a snitch. And snitches don't do very well in prison, federal or otherwise. And so this is a huge mess that the Trump administration has created for itself, first by issuing that memo the Sunday after the 4th of July, which caused an uproar, and then by engaging in this course of conduct where last week Todd Blanch is interviewing her over 2 days for 9 or 10 hours. And then just 2 or 3 days ago at the White House, there was a strategy meeting with Vice President J.D. Vance, White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles, Attorney General Pam Bondi, Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanch, and FBI Director Kash Patel. First of all, the DOJ is supposed to be independent of the White House. And they're all going to the White House to have a strategy meeting with the Vice President of the United States to discuss Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell and how to proceed. They have completely obliterated over 200 years of DOJ independence from the president, from the White House. That's Banana Republic kind of shit. Anyway, getting back to the statement. Today's sentence holds Ghislaine Maxwell accountable for perpetrating heinous crimes against children. This sentence sends a strong message that no one is above the law, and it is never too late for justice. We again express our gratitude to Epstein's and Maxwell's victims for their courage in coming forward, in testifying at trial, and in sharing their stories as a part of today's sentencing. According to the allegations in the indictment, court documents, and evidence presented at trial, from at least, and this is going to be repetitive of some of the information that's in the indictment, so I'm going to skip around a little bit just to give you a heads up. From at least 1994 up to and including in or about 2004, Ghislaine Maxwell assisted, facilitated, and participated in Jeffrey Epstein's abuse of minor girls by, among other things, helping Epstein to recruit, groom, and ultimately abuse victims known to Maxwell and Epstein to be under the age of 18. The victims were as young as 14 years old when they were groomed and abused by Maxwell and Epstein, both of whom knew that their victims were in fact minors. As a part and in furtherance of their scheme to abuse minor victims, Maxwell and Epstein enticed and caused minor victims to travel to Epstein's residences in different states, which Maxwell knew and intended would result in their grooming for and subjection to sexual abuse. Maxwell enticed and groomed minor girls to be abused in multiple ways. For example, Maxwell attempted to befriend certain victims by asking them about their lives, their schools, their families, and taking them to the movies or on shopping trips. Maxwell also acclimated the victims to Epstein's conduct simply by being present for victim interactions with Epstein, which put victims at ease by providing the assurance and comfort of an adult woman who seemingly approved of Epstein's behavior. Additionally, Epstein offered to help some of the victims by paying for travel and or educational opportunities, and Maxwell encouraged certain victims to accept Epstein's assistance. As a result, victims were made to feel indebted and believe that Maxwell and Epstein were trying to help them. Maxwell also normalized and facilitated sexual abuse for one victim by discussing sexual topics, undressing in front of the victim, and being present when the victim was undressed and encouraging the victim to massage Epstein. As Maxwell and Epstein intended, these grooming behaviors left minor victims vulnerable and susceptible to sexual abuse by Epstein. Maxwell was then present for certain sexual encounters between minor victims and Epstein, such as interactions where a minor victim was undressed and ultimately was present for sex acts perpetrated by Epstein on minor victims. That abuse included sexualized massages during which a minor victim was fully or partially nude, as well as group sexualized massages of Epstein involving a minor victim where Maxwell was present. In some instances, Maxwell participated in the sexual abuse of minor victims. Ultimately, minor victims were subjected to sexual abuse that included, I'm not going to read the specifics. Maxwell and Epstein's, they're fucking gross. It's graphic and they're fucking gross. And these were 14-year-old girls. who were specifically targeted because they were poor and came from single mother homes. Maxwell and Epstein's victims were groomed or abused at Epstein's residences in New York, Florida, and New Mexico, as well as Maxwell's residence in London, England. In the earlier phase of the conspiracy from at least 1994 through approximately 2001, Maxwell and Epstein identified vulnerable girls, typically from single mother households and difficult financial circumstances. This earlier phase required the defendant, Maxwell, and Epstein to identify one girl at a time to target for grooming and abuse. In the later phase, from approximately 2001 until at least approximately 2004, Maxwell and Epstein enticed, recruited, and caused to be enticed and recruited minor girls to visit Epstein's Palm Beach residence to engage in sex acts with Epstein, after which Epstein, Maxwell, or another employee of Epstein's, there are other folks involved and the DOJ knows who they are, would give the victims hundreds of dollars in cash. Maxwell and Epstein encouraged one or more of those victims to travel with Epstein with the intention that the victim engage in sex acts with Epstein. Moreover, and in order to maintain and increase his supply of victims, Maxwell and Epstein also paid certain victims to recruit additional girls to be similarly abused by Epstein. In this way, Maxwell and Epstein created a network of underage victims for Epstein to sexually exploit. And again, I want to reiterate, following a jury trial, Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted of the following things: conspiracy to entice minors to travel to engage in illegal sex acts, conspiracy to transport minors to participate in illegal sex acts, transporting minors to participate in illegal sex acts, sex trafficking conspiracy, and sex trafficking of minors. That's what she was convicted of at trial. She is a convicted child sex trafficker. I'm going to skip ahead to the trial testimony. There were 4 victims who testified at the trial. One of them testified using her full real name. That is Annie Farmer. Annie Farmer and her younger sister, Maria Farmer, were some of Epstein's very first victims. And their abuse started in New Albany, Ohio, in the early to mid 90s. Annie Farmer's younger sister, Maria, I believe, was the first person to report Jeffrey Epstein to the FBI in 1996, at which point in time she also reported Donald Trump to the FBI. Nothing was done. It was, I believe it was Annie Farmer. If you want to get their backstory and see actual interviews with them, watch the 4-part documentary Jeffrey Epstein, Filthy Rich on Netflix. That one hit a little home to me because his abuse started in New Albany, Ohio, where I had graduated from high school just a few years before this all got started. I grew up about 2 miles down the road from where Jeffrey Epstein started his abuse of teenage girls. And so when I watched that the first time and learned that for the first time, it kind of freaked me out a little bit, I got to tell you. But let's get back to the victim's testimony. The first accuser who testified used a pseudonym, a fake name. She testified under the name Jane. She met Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein in 1994 when she was 14 at a camp for teenage girls, and Jeffrey Epstein was a benefactor of that camp. Jane and her mother met Epstein for tea in Florida, and he said he could mentor her. She then started going to Epstein's home by herself. She testified that Maxwell and Epstein made her feel special, and that Ghislaine Maxwell felt like her older sister. It changed when the abuse started happening, she testified. Jane described in graphic detail incidents of sexual abuse with Epstein, and that Maxwell would occasionally join in on, both in Palm Beach, Florida, and Manhattan when she was 14, 15, and 16 years old. She testified that Maxwell would sometimes be involved, touching her and Epstein. At least once, Maxwell instructed her on how Epstein liked to be massaged while the three were in Epstein's massage room. It seemed very casual, like it was very normal, like it was not a big deal. It made me feel confused because that did not feel normal to me. She said it took her years before she was able to tell anyone about what happened, saying she felt shame and disgust and confusion. Kate, the second victim who testified, also used a pseudonym. She testified about meeting Maxwell around the same time, 1994, who then introduced her to Epstein and facilitated sexual encounters, including providing her with clothing and encouraging her to recruit other girls. Kate, I believe, was British and was located in the UK, in London. But Maxwell invited Kate for tea at her London townhome, and then the massages and things started. A couple of weeks later, Maxwell called Kate to ask her if she would do her a favor and come give Epstein a massage. The first time in London, Epstein was there in a robe. Maxwell gave Kate massage oil and closed the door behind her. Epstein disrobed and initiated a sex act with her. Maxwell called her back for a second time to meet with Epstein. She said, "I'm so glad you're here. You did such a good job last time that he wanted you to come back." This time, Epstein was in the massage room naked when Maxwell brought Kate to the same room, and as she closed the door behind her, she said, "Have a good time." In her testimony, Kate testified that she traveled at Epstein's expense several times to New York, Palm Beach, Florida, Epstein Island. It's called Little St. James Island in the U.S. Virgin Islands. Maxwell invited her to the island multiple times to give Epstein massages. Now, here's the thing about Epstein Island. When you fly in, you land in the U.S. Virgin Islands. You don't land on Epstein's Island. So you land and then you get to the island by boat or by helicopter. And Ghislaine Maxwell had a helicopter license. She had a pilot license. But once you're on the island, there's no way for you to get off of the island. And in that same documentary, one young woman was interviewed after she had been raped 3 times in one day. She walked to the cliffs and was going to walk into the ocean and try to swim away. Epstein had cameras all over the place. And she said, as she was standing there on the cliffs, he came up behind her and took her back to the house for more sexual abuse. Also for Kate, during a visit to the Palm Beach residence, after she had turned 18, there was a schoolgirl outfit laid out for her, a pleated skirt, white panties, white socks, and a shirt. And Maxwell said, "I thought it would be fun for you to take Jeffrey his tea in this outfit." Maxwell told her frequently, she discussed sexual topics with Kate frequently. She discussed oral sex, and Maxwell told her that Epstein needed to have sex about 3 times a day. "You know what he likes, cute, young, pretty girls like you," Maxwell said, according to her testimony. Here's an important part that I think is going to be confusing for a lot of people. Kate said that she kept in contact with Epstein until around 2012, when she was about 24. She last traveled with Maxwell and Epstein when she was about 24, but she continued contact with Epstein through her early 30s. She described staying in contact with him as a mix of denial and fear. I did not want to admit what had happened to me, and I felt by ceasing communication, I would have to acknowledge the events that had taken place, and I would have to say something. I was also fearful of disengaging because I had witnessed how connected they both were, and that made me feel fearful. Third was Carolyn. Carolyn used her real first name, but did not disclose her last name. She testified about meeting Virginia Jeffrey, formerly Virginia Roberts, at age 14 and being introduced to Epstein, with Maxwell arranging appointments and touching Carolyn inappropriately. Carolyn said she was 14 years old when she began to go to Epstein's home in Palm Beach 2 or 3 times per week in the early 2000s. On one visit, Carolyn was setting up a massage room for him when Maxwell came into the room. Maxwell touched Carolyn's breasts, hips, and buttocks, and testified that she, quote, had a great body for Epstein and his friends, according to her testimony. Carolyn said that she went to Epstein's over 100 times in all. Each time she visited, $300 in cash was left for her on the bathroom sink. She testified that something sexual happened every single time she went. Carolyn described a number of sexual encounters with Epstein. She said that Maxwell frequently saw her naked in the massage room. She was too young initially to travel to Epstein's island and also didn't have a passport, and her mother would not let her travel internationally. She testified that she used the money to buy drugs. She testified that Maxwell would call her on her mom's phone or on her mom's boyfriend's phone if they couldn't reach her directly. Carolyn sobbed when prosecutor Maureen Comey, James Comey's daughter, who was fired 2 years ago, who prosecuted this case and who prosecuted Jeffrey Epstein's case, well, was the lead prosecutor until he became no longer alive, put it that way. She sobbed when Maureen Comey asked her if she was trying to get money for her testimony, which was a tactic of the defense. No, money will not ever fix what that woman has done to me, because what she did was wrong. She takes vulnerable young girls and traffics them, and I am so petrified now that my own daughters are going to be trafficked. Last to testify was Annie Farmer, who used her full name. She has spoken publicly multiple times for years. She spoke in open court during both Epstein's 2019 bail hearing and Maxwell's bail hearing a year later. She testified for several hours. Her older sister was Maria Farmer. I had those backwards. Her older sister worked for Epstein, and Annie Farmer met him during the 1995 holiday season. Epstein paid for her commercial flights to New York. She described going to the billionaire's ranch in New Mexico in 1996 at age 16, where she thought she would be joining other peers, but she was the only teen there. His ranch in New Mexico was huge. I believe it was about an hour outside of Albuquerque, and it was in the middle of fucking nowhere. It's not like you could just walk down the street and be saved. It was very isolated. Maxwell gave her nude massages. She was terrified. She wanted to leave. Epstein frequently climbed in bed with her naked. That was the testimony at trial. And again, I want to reiterate that she was convicted of conspiracy to entice minors to travel to engage in illegal sex acts, conspiracy to transport minors to participate in illegal sex acts, transporting minors to participate in illegal sex acts, sex trafficking conspiracy, and sex trafficking of minors. There's been a lot of discussion. So Donald Trump, I guess, ordered the DOJ to release a lot of materials and a lot of testimony from the grand jury in Ghislaine Maxwell's case, which, number one, is insane. Ghislaine Maxwell's appeals are still pending. Her appeal is currently at the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has not made a decision about whether or not they will hear her appeal. We're going to talk about her appeal next. Victims testified that Ghislaine Maxwell participated in their sexual abuse in Jeffrey Epstein's presence and outside of Jeffrey Epstein's presence. And again, you know, with what's going on with Trump and all of this stuff, there was one thing that I forgot to mention earlier, and I've already seen a bunch of TikToks and videos from a bunch of the inbred fart-huffing MAGA Gomer chuds saying that Ghislaine Maxwell cleared Donald Trump because it's been reported that she told Todd Blanch she never saw Donald Trump do anything inappropriate in her presence. If Donald Trump is going to have sex with a minor, do you think he's going to do it in front of Ghislaine Maxwell? They're so fucking dumb and gullible and easily manipulated. Just like our electorate, but you know, I digress. I just want everyone to be clear on what she was convicted of and the fact that Donald Trump is considering a full pardon for a convicted child sex trafficker because he thinks it will benefit him in some way. He's going to do that before he releases anything from the actual Epstein files, which apparently his name has already been redacted from. His name has to be present in those files in order to be redacted. And so now at this point, if anything is released additionally from these files that has not been publicly released before, and you see a name that's redacted, how are we supposed to know that's not Donald Trump's name? It's been redacted. We can't see it. And again, you know, remember that so a little timeline here. Early February, Pam Bondi invites all these right-wing MAGA media personalities and podcasters to the White House to release volume 1 of the Epstein files, these big white binders that they all had. And it turns out that it was heavily redacted. It was all stuff that was released publicly before. There was nothing new in it. They got frustrated and cranky. In February, during a couple of Fox News appearances, Pam Bondi said, the Epstein client files are on my desk. The Epstein client list is on my desk. I'm reviewing it now. She said, the client list is on my desk. I'm reviewing it now. She said she had 10,000 hours of video that Epstein had recorded. She said that the total Epstein files was like 300 gigabytes. She said they got a truckload of evidence, tens of thousands of pages of documents. She said all of that stuff publicly. Then, all of a sudden, by the middle of March, somebody ordered 1,000 FBI personnel to review the Epstein files 24/7 for like 3 weeks and catalog every single place in the Epstein files where Donald Trump's name appeared. And then after that, those were redacted from the Epstein files. So they've been altered. It's unclear whether they made a copy and redacted the copy or whether they're altering the original documents. Then it was reported in May that Pam Bondi told Donald Trump, your name appears in the Epstein files on multiple times. And then, you know, the first weekend in July is when they release this fucking memo. And 3 weeks after that, Todd Blanch is meeting with Ghislaine Maxwell. And then she gets transferred to a minimum security prison, and here we are. So, what's the basis for Ghislaine Maxwell's appeal? So bear in mind that the time frame of activities that she was convicted is from 1994 to 2004. 2005-ish is when the very first investigation started into Jeffrey Epstein, and that was by local law enforcement in West Palm Beach, Florida. And they built up that case for 2 years before the FBI took it over, and it was being handled by U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida, Alex Acosta, who went on to become a cabinet member in Donald Trump's first cabinet. He was Secretary of Labor. Alex Acosta, being the lead prosecutor on the case, worked out a sweetheart deal with Jeffrey Epstein. He pled guilty to 1 count of paying a minor for sex, and was sentenced to 18 months in the local jail. And he served 13 months of that sentence, but he got work release, meaning that 6 days a week, he got to leave the jail at 8 a.m. and he had to return later that evening at, I don't know what time, 7 p.m. or 8 p.m., and to spend the night in jail. But he was out for 10 or 12 hours a day, 6 days a week for 13 months after being convicted of paying a minor for sex. As a part of that, it's called a non-prosecution agreement. As a part of that non-prosecution agreement, and Jeffrey Epstein had, you can see this in that same documentary, Jeffrey Epstein, Filthy Rich on Netflix. They cover the legal team that Jeffrey Epstein had. Incredibly expensive, high-powered lawyers who started surveilling and investigating West Palm Beach, Florida detectives, and who began investigating and surveilling the FBI agents who were working on the case. Incredible intimidation tactics, just incredible. Again, that nobody like us would be able to get away with, you know? And there's been a lot, but as a part of that non-prosecution agreement, there was language in there that Alex Acosta, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida, agreed in perpetuity to not prosecute anyone other than Jeffrey Epstein for these activities. I don't believe any specific names were listed in that agreement, but it used language like all of his associates, all of his alleged co-conspirators, any other guys who were having sex with these minors at Jeffrey Epstein's homes. The U.S. Attorney agreed not to prosecute anybody else for these crimes, which is bullshit. That's bullshit. And so as a basis for her appeal, and this is also what's her arguments before the U.S. Supreme Court right now, she argued that Jeffrey Epstein's non-prosecution agreement with the United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Florida barred Ghislaine Maxwell's prosecution by the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. She's arguing that non-prosecution agreement was binding, and even if she was guilty, the government had waived its right to prosecuting her in that agreement that they struck with Jeffrey Epstein. Now, there were a lot of problems with that non-prosecution agreement. As a matter of law, the government was not permitted to enter into this non-prosecution agreement with Jeffrey Epstein without the input of the then identified victims. The victims found out about this non-prosecution agreement after the agreement was in place, after Jeffrey Epstein appeared in court. They put it on the record. He pled guilty. He was sentenced to 18 months with work release. After that occurred is when the victims found out that that agreement had been put in place. So they were shut out of that entire process illegally. So there are questions as to whether that non-prosecution agreement was legal and proper in the first place, regardless of the arguments that Ghislaine Maxwell is now making. So she's on really shaky ground right there. So she made that argument to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit on appeal from the Southern District of New York. That appeal was heard by a 3-judge panel, and that 3-judge panel affirmed the district court's June 29th, 2022 judgment of conviction, as well as her sentence. They specifically found, we hold that Epstein's non-prosecution agreement did not bar Ghislaine Maxwell's prosecution by the Southern District of New York, as the non-prosecution agreement does not bind the Southern District of New York. It only is binding, arguably, on the Southern District of Florida. So, accordingly, the appellate court affirmed the district court's judgment of conviction and the 20-year sentence. They found that that was reasonable. But that was then, that was then. Now she's meeting with Todd Blanch. Now Donald Trump is saying he has the right to pardon her. And bear in mind, it's like during the first couple of weeks following the DOJ's release of that memo, that first Sunday in July, Donald Trump was on a tirade, man. He was like, this is a Democrat hoax. This is bullshit. He said it was bullshit more than once. He said the Epstein files were written by Obama, the Clintons, Joe Biden, James Comey, all these other people, that it was a setup, it was a witch hunt, it was a hoax. 4 months after his attorney general appeared on Fox News and said, I have the Epstein client list on my desk. I'm reviewing it now. We got thousands and thousands of pages of evidence. I have 10,000 hours of video evidence. And Donald Trump's trying to convince people it's a hoax. His own fucking base wasn't buying that. And, but now his DOJ is negotiating with Ghislaine Maxwell. They haven't released anything new from the Epstein files. They seem to be holding firm on that. And, frankly, there's one document that they could release today. They still haven't released Jeffrey Epstein's autopsy report. You would think that's the one thing they want to get out there, if he actually killed himself. Which, who the fuck knows at this point? Who knows, man? I mean, he was indicted and arrested for this stuff once before and used his legal team to essentially get off and go back out and offend for another decade, from 2009 until 2019. Interestingly, because he completed that sentence in 2009. He served 13 months of that sentence. So that was completed in 2009. He still had his ranch in New Mexico. He still had his place in West Palm Beach. He still had his place in Manhattan. He had his place in Paris. And he still had Epstein Island for another decade. But what happened in Florida in 2011? Our current Attorney General for the United States of America in 2011 was elected Attorney General for the state of Florida. And she served in that office from 2011 until 2019. During that 8-year term, she did absolutely nothing to Jeffrey Epstein. She initiated no investigations into him, even though he had already been convicted and served a sentence. She was not keeping an eye on him at all. She initiated no new investigations to him. The one thing she did do during that period of time, she initiated a large investigation into Trump University, because a lot of the victims who had been scammed by Donald Trump and Trump University lived in Florida. She shut that investigation down after Donald Trump gave her a $25,000 campaign contribution. But during that period of time, she never initiated any investigation into Jeffrey Epstein. Again, Donald Trump is considering pardoning a woman who was convicted of conspiracy to entice minors to travel to engage in illegal sex acts, conspiracy to transport minors to participate in illegal sex acts, transporting minors to participate in illegal sex acts, sex trafficking conspiracy, and sex trafficking of minors. Those convictions stand to this day, and Donald Trump is considering pardoning her. Thank you for watching, as always. I really appreciate it. Please click like, please leave a comment, please subscribe to my page. It's free. If you have any questions about anything that I discussed in this episode, please leave them in the comments. I imagine there's going to be a few. I am going to do a follow-up episode to this that I'm putting together right now, so I'll probably record that next weekend, where I'm going to talk more about the victims. They're being overshadowed in this process. They are being ignored in this process. They are being re-traumatized in this process, because this stuff is dominating every news cycle now, and they lived it. And now it's everywhere. It's on every podcast. It's on every radio show. It's on every cable news show. It's on the late night shows. It's in all of the news coverage. They can't escape it. And so they're being re-traumatized every single fucking day by this. And nobody in the Trump administration gives a shit, because Donald Trump and his MAGA base, they do not care about victims. They care about the perps. If the perps are on the left, yes. If the perps are on the right, it's like, God works through imperfect vessels, and we should be forgiving. And so they just let this shit slide. But I don't think Trump's base is going to let this stuff slide. But, we'll learn more over the coming days, weeks, and months. Thanks again for watching, everybody. I appreciate it, and I'll see you guys soon. Please be safe this week.